Heyo. Hi. I got about 2 hours to do this one. And I am being rather selective of the location. I want to be outside. It just rained and the air is nice. I also don't want it to be too loud. So I think I found the spot. Let's see. Just about 2 hours standing here in this spot at this angle. Because if I turn too much, it gets dark. Or because this is my old phone. My old phone is not as good. Yeah, a lot of words. But okay. This is the Reframe. Two titles: the Reframe and the Crusade. I believe I don't. Yeah, I'm not. I'm gonna bounce between both of them at the same time, actually. So they're so heavily connected. The Crusade. Actually, I wanna, because I have another phone. I wanna do something that I normally couldn't do, especially outside, right? Which is actually use definitions in real time. I could intuitively give the definition and then reframe it using my own words. However, I prefer not to do that. That is not my intention. With this particular video, I have a desire for accuracy in what I'm actually talking about. So, there's a particular definition of crusade that matters to me that is not showing up in the first search. But the one that I will use is, or the one that I'm seeing first that I will just give to you for the crusade is any of the military expeditions undertaken by European Christians in the 11th, 12th, and 13th centuries to recover control of the Holy Land from the Muslims. Yeah, that's the first one. And that one I can use. So I'll say it again. Any of the military expeditions undertaken by European Christians in the 11th, 12th, and 13th centuries to recover control of the Holy Land from the Muslims. That particular definition, for me, has a potential for um, being tied with historical skewings of information. And I will get into that. What I mean by that is there is potential for this definition to have ties to propaganda and the burying of history and the editing of history. So I haven't really studied history enough to confirm that claim in a way so I can describe it using historical facts. But I'm a very smart man. And I would like to give you another definition of the word crusade. Hopefully, it doesn't take too long. Because, yeah, I have about 2 hours. Okay, here we go. A long and determined attempt to achieve, change, or stop something because of your strong beliefs. Hold that. I'm going to say it again because I want you to hold it, okay? A long and determined attempt to achieve, change or stop something because of your strong beliefs, that is something that could be defined as a crusade. I like that definition because I can work with it for the intentions that I'm recording this video for. It serves the entirety of where I'm going to be bouncing around now. All right. Give me one moment while I check the guy who's been checking me because he pulled up on a car and he's like really interested. Like, he just wanted to check me out, man. He's a very nosy guy. It's not his life is void of interesting things, and he's probably a slave to things that he's willingly coming into agreement with being a slave for, which is why he's interested, right? But because I've been practicing standing firm, he checked me out, and now he's just walking past me. So my lessons have been paying off. This is a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful spot. One more time, because really needed to stick with you. A long and determined attempt to achieve change or stop something because of your strong beliefs. It is that definition that I will be mainly bouncing around for when I mention the word crusade. Okay? Okay. Other than that, I will be using my own language to address the concept of what I like to call the reframe, which is very, very important. This is one of my most important videos, and possibly one of my most impactful ones as it pertains to the undoing of things that were buried with such an efficiency that the people who buried it genuinely believe that that thing will not be resurrected or uncovered or rediscovered or remembered. However, I am here. Not only that, we are here. We are still here. Even after all the crusades that have taken place after 2020 to divide along many avenues, pillars, binds, and structures that support the foundation of human connection, human reciprocity, human evolution towards beneficial gains for the collective race called humans. After 2020, there have been, well, prior to 2020 and after 2020, there have been many, many crusades. However, after 2020, there have been an explosion of crusades happening within a very concentrated span of time. And I would like to plug in the Pandora's box element because that actually falls deeply in alignment with the nature of this explosion of crusades carefully pointed towards dissolving, separating, supporting structures for human advancement, human benefit, human flourishing. A lot of words, right? Yeah, I know. I know. I would like to just go off on some of the crusades that I can bring to the forefront of my mind currently. And I will do that using gender, class, and culture to the best of my ability, flowing through these three avenues. Okay, so to frame the nature of the problem, or to frame the nature or the underlying intention of these explosions of crusades is extremely difficult because I'm a singular person. And as a singular person, I have a singular experience limited by the places that I have been to physically and the places that I have been exposed to either digitally, through the radio, through books, through external forces that are valid accounts of other people's experiences. This applies to me and this applies to everyone else. As it pertains to the largest problems, I understand I am limited in my ability as an individual to genuinely, completely frame the problem in a way to where I can address it in one go. And that is why I'm pouring so much into this series of the human element, because I do have the ability to undo constrictions placed on people, specifically mentally. Um, I have the ability to unearth forgotten things spiritually, emotionally within people. And there's a third one I'll probably remember at some point going along here. But the point is, as I've said before, there are players who are not in the game who, if they were to enter the game, the nature of the game would shift to something that I would consider to be more wholesome and sensible. And the reason for that being is divide and conquer is it's a tactic, but it's also a phase. And what do I mean by that? Like, divide and conquer is a concept, it's a tactic, but within those two things, there are phases that have to happen in between or during the dividing, so to speak. And after, let's say, the people who intend to divide feel that they have created sufficient division, then it morphs into phases of conquering. The conquering comes after the division because it's part of the tactic. However, as that concept is a combined concept, both division and conquering have their individual phases that need to be carried out in order for it to be an effectively implemented tactic in real world, either physical or spiritual warfare. So, a lot of words. The Crusade. Maybe I should say the Crusades? But if I say the Crusade, I can also keep it very general. I'll start with the experience and the culture that I'm most closer to and familiar with, and then I'll expand outward. The ones that I'm most familiar with, I will have the most um, confidence in stamping as to their validity. And as I venture outside of my jurisdiction of lived experience within particular cultures, I will do my best to maintain accuracy without fooling myself into believing that I am wholly right in my assessment of these cultures from the outside view. I grew up in Flatbush, in a part that is considered now to be Little Haiti, which is pretty cool because Haitian people have lived there predominantly, but it wasn't until very recently that Little Haiti was used as a title to address this area, Flatbush. Melanated people. I like to use the word melanated as opposed to black because it's more accurately assessing for me when I'm using labels to address a particular class of people. Present in melanated um, dynamics, relational dynamics, is an overflow and overwhelming pressure in regards to the division between healthy relational dynamics. What I see present in between these healthy relationship dynamics are particular things. Um, a distrust, and I'll use that in a general word. I could say a distrust of and then say something specific, but I'll just say a distrust. Very generally speaking, there is a distrust between people. And also, with that distrust, there is an acceptance. What an acceptance of what? There's an acceptance of the normality of use using for selfish gain. There's an acceptance of the practice, because I would like to use the word practice. There's an acceptance of the practice that has to deal with picking a person up, so to speak, and discarding them when you feel that you've extracted enough use from the relation. I have a personal gripe with the word capitalism because, as it pertains to the human element, in this world, in this universe of the human element, capitalism would fall into the category of a blanket term. Why is that? Because capitalism, as a singular word, could not possibly attack or highlight the dynamics as it has to do with the lessening of morality. Um, it's a very post it note kind of word that one could use to gloss over patterns that people have 100% control over. Even more dangerously, in combination with the fact that capitalism separates people from their innate power as a word, as a blanket term, and uses that term to pacify the relevance of genuine individual influence. It also enables people to rot. So there's the combination of the blame, which is placed onto, there's actually a chain, right? There's a chain because anyone could use the word capitalism to very generally attack enemies that they personally hold within their heart, which may not be the same enemies as another person would use when they're using the word capitalism. One person could use the word capitalism as a way to address the enemy that could be labeled with a combination of words such as the inability or the increase in difficulty to gain capital because of attributes like skin color and location where a person was born. And that has an allure to it because of the nature in which people have been genuinely placed into very constricting and debilitating not only worldviews but lifestyles. Lifestyles that have been long standing to the point to where, because of their long standing nature, in of itself, it has a validity to it as to its weight. It's been here for a long time, and the same as if you were to train an elephant by doing not so humane things, like chaining its leg and beating it or whatever. The same thing applies to a human being. After a while of having that chain in nature, or having that chain in combination with receiving certain beatings at certain times for expressing things that need to be expressed, there comes one, a defeated state, and two, an adjustment to states of defeat. I'll even add a third. After the adjustment to states of defeat, and that carries on long enough, you find yourself susceptible to defending states of defeat. The first two, very sad. The first two are very sad. The first two are very unfortunate. The third is highly, highly unfortunate because once the third starts, that's where the individual genuinely enters the realm of forfeiting their sovereignty and going in the opposite direction, which is accepting fully, or I think the adjustment, not accepting, because accepting kind of undermines the actual effectiveness of tumultuous, rapacious tactics placed on people. So acceptance wouldn't be the right word, but there is an adjustment that takes place, and that adjustment completely wipes out, for the most part, the avenues that a person could generate within themselves to provide freedom at some point for themselves and both for other people. So I will jump back to Flatbush. Before I jump back to Flatbush, I'll just say some general crusades that have happened after 2020. There has been the crusade to separate a man and a woman. There has been a crusade to undermine the value in a healthy relationship. And that particular one is attributed to specific cultures. I bounce between cultures. The diminishing of the value of a healthy relationship is not something that's universally attributed to all cultures as a lash, so to speak. However, it is placed heavily upon melanated people. Also, what people would call minorities, which are actually in real life the majority, but I guess I'll say the true majority, which is called the minority. this group, these groups tend to have um, poured into their culture a disintegration, a devaluing, um, the the taking away of the incentive to have healthy relationships, whether that be romantic or platonic. It's just a relationship in general. So there's been the crusade between the genders, and the crusade between the genders is long and determined, taking many different forms. And there has been a crusade to replace God. Um, that has been a long-standing crusade, which has reached sorry about that. That has been a long-standing crusade, which has reached an interesting point in its evolution because it's become so effective and so impactful and so overwhelming in its current real world influence. Like currently in the real world, there is a genuine replacing of God in God's truest essence as it's meant to be represented in reality. And the nature of that crusade comes from people who have always been in opposition to the undertone of the things that God would implement as a standard, which is why Jesus was crucified. Um, there was a standard set. There was a standard, I would say, actually, the way that that standard was set by that man would also classify as a crusade carried out by a singular person. A singular person tapped into the truth that they are not truly alone. So this is a singular, actualized, awakened person. And the things that come in with that dynamic make it to where it's not necessarily accurate to call that singular person a singular person, because once you cross into a particular threshold, you genuinely merge with universal elements, and you allow yourself to act in accordance with the force that is omnipotence and co-create with that omnipotent force. So there's a very specific distinction when it comes to an awakened, actualized, singular individual and the fact that they are not necessarily singular. And as it stands in this video, I will not break down why a person is not singular when they come in contact with this omnipotent force. This is very complicated, and I want to stay on topic of the crusade and what is most sensible to do in response to the crusade of crusades that have the intention of dissolving human connection. And that correct response, by the way, is something that I would like to call the reframe. There needs to be a combination of the awakening of the people, the connection with their sovereignty, and the implementation of creating a new standard, starting a crusade, if you will, utilizing the knowledge of how people have been framed and how we can reframe ourselves moving forward. so that these magic, because this is actual magic, so that these spells and binds that influence the way people show up in the world can be reformed. And when you reform a frame, I would like to call that a reframe. And reforming a reframe is extremely efficient when it comes to undoing things in the way that they have been done, which is what what I would call a magical way. Because framing someone in the view of the human element, I would like to input the visual of a person being trapped in a mirror world or in a mirror, or maybe more accurately, more trapped in a role, maybe trapped in a combination of roles. So there's societal pressure, influence, um, there's societal philosophies that people gravitate towards that would encourage, intimidate, incentivize towards aligning with a multitude of frames or roles, a multitude of roles, whether it's a singular or multitude, however you want to call it, that don't necessarily represent the being as a whole. And when that happens, what you get is a distortion. I'm using magic words right now: frame, mirror, distortion. And I have used previous words before that are words of magic, like how well you can see what's actually going on. That would be a, like, the word resolution and clarity are synonymous with that. Why aren't you necessarily clear on what's really going on? It's because you're low res. You have low resolution. And so things are blurry when there are real things happening. While they're happening, you fall into the realm of saying, what's happening? What's going on? Well, what's happening is real things. And you won't be able to see real things with a level of efficiency that satisfies you or and generally puts you in the realm of clarity until you raise your resolution. So you raise your resolution, you gain true sight, and you become more sound. Because through the gaining of that sight, you are also now accurately linked with the nature of natural unfolding, as opposed to the way that you would like things to unfold. Two different things. One has more distortion than the other. And so to empower the individual to become aware of distortions, navigate these distortions internally and externally, that will increase the resolution of the average individual. When the average individual increases their resolution, they will also increase in sovereignty naturally. That increase in sovereignty is a requirement, 100%, if we are at all going to do what's necessary to combat what has been done in a very magical way using spells and binds. The way that they have been framed. Um, People see people and they frame them on site. Why? What do I mean by people frame people on site? Well, we have been trained to, and this one of the core societal philosophies, because I hope you've been paying attention to what I'm saying. One of the core societal philosophies that has been implemented in a way to where people will generally not refute it is the first impression. From my experience, where I'm at right now, I don't see the real world benefit of a first impression. And the only way I could see that a person would fall in alignment with trusting any first impression, whether it be from themselves or from their others, is if they are heavily intertwined into a culture or a culture or a family or an environment that is extremely reductionistic from a human standpoint of view. That is the only way I could actually perceive someone hearing about a first impression and then staying in alignment with that concept of the first impression having any validity whatsoever. There is no validity in the first impression. The only way you can have validity in that first impression is if you are societally constrained to play the game, this game of rank and this game of tit for tat. Once you fall into that reign, that realm, it like first impressions make sense to you. You've been reduced before you even had a chance to conceptualize the multitude of tactics that are used to reduce a human. And then when you finally gain the ability to form thought, you are given these ideas, these structures, these concepts that are innately inhuman. The first impression is, I will stand on this. The first impression as a concept is innately dehumanizing and inhumane because it removes the multitude of planes on which a human actually operates and unfolds over time. It negates the potential for a person to transform, which is a natural unfolding if a person is living in real world dynamics, not augmented dynamics, not dynamics that you would find in walled cities where shadows and beasts are basically myth because the walled city has become so efficient and so elaborate in their means of keeping danger out that they also at the same time keep out the elements that would contribute to a person gaining genuine resolution. Hope you've been following. So with the human element in this universe, one of the most popular concepts that is denoted in this universe is the concept of the first impression. If you find value in what I'm saying, what I have said, or what I will come to say in the future, I encourage you to denote the validity of the first impression first internally. What do I mean by that? For this to be a successful thing for me to impart onto you, I have to let you know that other people's first impressions of you hold no real world weight. There is no grounding, there is no root, there is no higher order benefit to the individual and the collective to operate within the acceptance of one of the pillars of nonsensical, dehumanizing concepts, which is the first impression. The first impression, if you align with it heavily, you will find yourself experiencing losing opportunities. In what ways? Many ways. You will lose the most beautiful relationships you will ever have in your entire life. The relationship with yourself, one of the most important relationships, will be heavily, heavily susceptible to external pressures created by people who do not have your best interest at heart. External pressures created by people who can never truly see you, nor do they want to see you. And if they ever had the chance to come in contact with your genuine frame, they would attack it, they would minimize it, and they would diminish its value. If you are not careful, you will fall into a family or a culture that considers this normal, and you will forever find yourself chasing the carrot that the spirit wants and not being able to properly conceptualize what that spiritual carrot is. Because you cannot properly conceptualize what that spiritual carrot is, other people will inform you of the form that that carrot takes. They will usurp you. They will extract from you, whether willingly, unwillingly, consciously or unconsciously. They will usurp. They will extract. They will undermine. And through this culture, if you are not careful, because especially if this culture comes with other societal benefits, you will accept that trade. And through the acceptance of that trade and the fact that you generally have not properly conceptualized your spiritual carrot, you will find yourself on a hamster wheel, not by not even in some grand awareness consciously, but as a felt experience. Your somatic experience will be one of being on a hamster wheel. You will cry at random times. You will be flowing in and out or sustaining states of defeat. And going back to the trained elephant, that sustained defeat, you may find yourself adjusting to sustain defeat. And if you're not careful, if you spend too much time adjusting to sustain defeat, you may lose your desire to properly conceptualize your spiritual carrot because you become so enmeshed in external reframes of what that carrot is for you. If you are not careful and you stay too long in that state of adjusting for operating in states of defeat while calling that normal, what you will actually be doing is making yourself susceptible to true darkness. True darkness meaning you will have your spiritual carrot and its desire because that's the contract when you came here. There's a reason why you came here. There's something you came to get. There's something you came to share, and it's all intertwined into one package. What will happen is you will lose your desire to resolve the combination of what you were meant to get and what you were meant to share. and you will allow that to be reframed by external pressures. That will put you on a hamster wheel up until the point where you have some extremely traumatic experience, or up until it's too late, as I've said many times in the human element, and you are on your deathbed, and have the you now have no choice but to meet the reality of all the things that you have tried to stuff that can't in the real world be stuffed. The only thing you can really do is bypass. And external systems, both past and present, are really good at creating doctrines, philosophies, justifications for the bypass. Because if you do so successfully, you will gain societal, social benefit, um, praise, approval, acceptance. Praise, approval, acceptance from people who, specifically, if they were to meet your genuine frame, they would attack, diminish, undermine its value. What a profound act of self hatred. My intention for this video is to, within these 2 hours, give as much detail as I can to arm oneself to properly conceptualize self love so that they are genuinely self empowered to connect with themselves, to take the vision of what their spiritual carrot is and bring it into a form that's accurate based on the knowledge of the individual and where they belong in society at present. That's the best way I could word that. I feel like I could word that better. The individual and where they are most harmoniously placed within present society, present planet, whatever present space, present time. Maybe society is too small within present time because we all exist in eras, and we could find ourselves in many different places on this earth or outside this earth, in particular eras. So I want to be as universal as I possibly can when I'm using my words. Almost an hour in. Okay. So everything that I just said highlights um, some of the ways in which we go against ourselves and the difficulty that actually is present to put ourselves into alignment. Because in order to put ourselves into alignment, we have to be able to address the mold that we have been pressed into over time, um, either through our own volition or harrowing pressures from the external. And whatever combination of the two you may find yourself in. External pressures that are not necessarily that may mean well, but certainly don't serve your highest order representation. The way that you represent in its highest order, whether there's a combination of you putting yourself out or someone else putting you down, or someone else's putting you down, or someone else's placing the intention for you to put yourself down. Whatever combination there is, it is helpful to know first that there is a way to navigate. Second, from my perspective, there is a duty to navigate it if you intend to do real right. If you intend to do real right, it is a duty to invest energy more so or just as much as any other societally approved thing to invest your energy towards, like keeping the lights on, keeping the water running, keeping the gas on, making sure you can walk with your back straight. Like with that, well, there's a whole range of things that you can value that may be more valuable to you based on your current circumstance. Whatever that is, it's important to know that there is a way to navigate the mold that's been given to you. There's a way to break it. And if you intend to do real right in the world, you have a duty to optimize the mold. You have a duty to become firm in the value and the benefit that is afforded to both you and the collective to take control of the mold. It's a duty. If you intend to do real right, that is a distinction. Not everyone who comes across these very sensible things that I say or the very sensible things that other people say have the intention to do real right or make real right adjustments or make real right inclusions, offerings. Some people genuinely do not have an internal or external incentive to make any real right contribution. They fall into the realm of valuing extraction and usurp as a way to progress in a general sense. Generally progress. However, if you are in alignment with what I'm saying or coming to find that you are in alignment with what I'm saying, there is a value and a duty for you to own your mold, to do whatever it takes to make sure that your mold is being chiseled and shaped into something that accurately represents your highest representation, your freest representation, your most authentic representation. And that is a constant practice. So I'd say furthermore, there is a duty for your dedication to the practice of seeing that your mold genuinely represents the, the world that is within you. And have an orientation to place yourself in external places that are in harmony with your internal representation. YOLO. When that came out, people just jumped on the bandwagon. You only live once. I don't believe you only live once because energy never dies. It's transferred, redistributed, it changes forms, but it never dies. So, from my perspective, I have no reason to believe that reincarnation is not a real thing if we are all carrying some fractal of source, which is an omnipotent, beyond death force living. I don't want to get too far off because he's talking about reframes, not what happens after death, right? But I'm just adding personal aids Man, hang on a second. All right, I had to get that out. Um, okay, so started off with the Crusade. I gave the definitions, and then I freestyled as to um, using the languages that are natural to me to address frames and the importance of reframing. So I'm going to jump back into Crusade, and then I'll jump back to the other one. So, Crusades. Um, if the way that you have been molded is inauthentic to you, and that inauthenticity is by nature not beneficial to you or the collective, and that mode of inauthenticity that is not beneficial to you or the collective in the grand scheme of things is something that has been intentionally created as a space for you to fall into, then that means a good way to combat the way that you have been framed is to understand what the crusade is and afford yourself the ability to carry out your own crusades. One thing that a person who can't carry out their own crusades would like to say, that I see a lot during these days, is normalize X. A person who cannot carry out their own crusades runs out to the masses to tell other people to do their work for them when it comes to crusades. Normalize this. Normalize this. How about you stand 10 toes down on what it is that's constricting your highest representation? If you do that, you would be starting a crusade in opposition to whatever pressures it was that was placed either before you were born or sometime during you were born to limit um, the value and inherent benefit of your greatest expression. What I'm saying is, people who fall into the line of saying normalize this are unaware of something that if they were to become aware of, it would mean very bad things for the people who did very bad things, to put many people in a position to where when they have the power to change something, they outsource that power to other people to potentially they outsource their own crusade to other people who most likely will not carry out that crusade for them. It's a stance of hope as opposed to an empowered stance of remembering what you can actually affect and eat and become effective in, or maybe a effect and become effective in. I gotta Google. I gotta hang on. I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do it now. I'm gonna do it now. Screw it. We're here. Effect versus affect. Affect is usually a verb meaning to produce an effect upon, to change something, while effect is usually a noun meaning a change that results when something or when something is done or happens. La, 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 la. Affect. Affect is usually a verb to produce an effect upon, or to act on or change. So affect is the verb. And effect is the noun, meaning a change that results when something is done or happens. Good to know. So affect is the verb. That'll help me remember. So there's something that you want to affect and become effective in. Before you were born, maybe during you were born, maybe there was a singular person or a group of people who took it upon themselves to completely alter a way that things were done in a manner that while they were running their crusade, they used a lot of very big words and very big pressures to convince over time that that alteration in the way things were done was something that made sense in the long span of time. However, it's important to know that crusades in of themselves are not bad or good things. The way that a crusade is undertaken, the tactics that are used, speak to the intent. And if you become aware of that, you can become aware of when you're aligning yourself with a crusade that doesn't necessarily serve you and what you want in the long run. I'm saying that in a very general way because maybe you're a bad person and you're aligning yourself with a crusade that you believe will assist you in doing bad things. However, it may be the case that you're actually empowering good people to do even more good things. And I would say the reverse is true. You might be a good person, believing that you are aligning yourself with a crusade that over time will enable you to contribute more good, though there is a high potential that that is not the case, and that you are actually creating potential for darkness to set up shop, so to speak. And so crusades in of themselves are neutral. They are not a good or bad thing, but when someone decides to take a slew of actions upon themselves and then what's the word I'm looking for? Delegate tasks to other people to aid in that crusade. The way that they go about their delegation, because I believe, now that I'm thinking about it, delegation is required for any success in any crusade because crusades first happen as a seed of a concept, a motion that should be carried, or a motion that would benefit a particular family culture of people, if you will. So a motion is carried. That motion that's carried, or the motion that is presented, a motion that is presented, and that motion that is presented needs the energy of other people who have decided that that motion is carried. I'm using particular language right now. So the motion is presented. A certain family, a culture will say motion carried. And through that motion carried, that will start the need for a delegation speaking to specific ways that tasks need to be done to successfully carry the motion into fruition for the success of the crusade. We want this crusade to actually transform society in a way that it was envisioned that society would be transformed when this motion was presented. Very neutral language. And because we as a family, as a culture, have decided or have seen value and merit in this motion, we have decided that we will devote ourselves to carrying out the task in the way, in the nature in which the person who presented the motion feels that those tasks should be carried out. And I use a lot of words. Now I'll say crusade. Someone comes, a leader, they have a speech. And that leader is starting a crusade by way of presenting a motion. And particular families, cultures will either negate that notion or see value in it and carry that notion. Or maybe even the people who negate a notion can see the value of it, they just don't see value towards their ends. So this is where the reality of conflict comes into play, and it's very important to not shy away from the reality of conflict, because conflict has to be navigated to create order, internally and externally. I kind of stopped the video and then started again, so I don't know. Time check. Oof. I got 15, I got like 45 minutes, so 45 plus the time that it's at right now. Okay, I know when I'm gonna stop. I got 45 minutes left. So I went back to the Crusade to basically just break down how like how I feel a crusade works underneath its workings. I didn't do it completely, but I know that presenting emotion and then finding people to carry that motion is a part of the crusade, an integral part of crusades in general. Very general language. So now I'm going to plug in factors. If we spend time back, there were times where the way that a crusade is carried out is more dependent. Wait for that truck to pass. If we peel time back, the more we peel time back, the more it's true from a human standpoint that the way a crusade is carried out requires more direct contact with people who you want to carry out your motion. This factor of the digital age is one factor, okay? And there has always been a crusade for anti intellectualism, and that serves the ends of people who would like to put all of humanity in cages. Because if you ramp up this anti intellectualism as a concept, as a pressure, and it overrides people's hearts and minds in in enough numbers and in enough degree, then you will have the appropriate amount of subservience and surrender to evolve um, your rapacious, usurping, extracting structure. So I'd say anti intellectualism is a factor that ties into what I'm addressing as a negative for the progress of humanity, a negative for people who intend to do real right. So, very specific language. I'm not saying anti intellectualism is a bad thing. I'm just saying it's a bad thing for anyone who wants to meet joy, share joy, have sensible relational dynamics that are the most fruitful and whole that they could possibly be. That's one factor. Another factor is, I wouldn't say it's the digital age, I would say it's the digital age is a factor. Okay, so the digital age is a factor. I would say the industrial age is a factor. Because both of these periods of time that carry um, necessities in it, both these periods of time create um, they create they create an effectiveness of the ability to carry out a crusade without coming into direct contact with people. Like, okay, if I was to peel back the time, not even that far back, to a time to where Nikola Tesla was alive, not very long ago, not very long ago. Even during that time, it is true that it was more so the case that you had to come into direct contact with people to expose them to a motion that you want carried. Like Nikola Tesla had a motion that could be wanted to be carried, and that motion could be free energy for all, right? Free energy accessible. If I were a person who had resources out the wazoo, connections out the wazoo, and my entire empire of connections and resources was dependent on extraction and usurping and the diminishing of sensible ways, then free energy for all would not be a motion that I would use my vast resources and connections to uphold or carry. So someone like Tesla, who has a motion that I would say, in its concept, benefits the whole. It wound up benefiting the whole either way, in in a very very impactful manner. It's just that he had been usurped. He had been overtaken in a grand sense, not just by one person, but by many parties. And then his his energy that he used to create this model and or number of models for transforming society, its direction and its form was taken by people who cannot see him for what he is. And when they see him for what he is, they wholeheartedly diminish its value. I've said this before. This is dynamic. Everything is full circle. So Tesla also falls into the category of someone who would be susceptible um, to having their spiritual carrot reframed by the world. Although that susceptibility was there, he managed to, by my understanding, maintain a degree of independence that put that susceptibility to shame. So, because that's the case, because there's a real danger with being susceptible to outsourcing your power, and he had some of that. It's also the case that once once things reach a certain point of effectiveness for a model that benefits people, it's no longer about whether or not you're susceptible to outsourcing yourself. Another important factor is whether or not you're capable of defending yourself in the physical, defending your creations in the physical from seizure. And perhaps what I'm pointing to is that seizure can take different forms. One form is psychological, and that is the most predominant form because the psychological it allows the bypass of the time taken from conflict because when you use a psychological, you get to convince people to go against their greatest good. And convincing people to go against their greatest good is a good way to bypass conflict and also meet your ends at the same time, which is why the psychological warfare has become the most predominant in the world. Psychological slavery is the most predominant in the world. So much so to where it creates the continuance of physical dominance. Physical dominance is an important factor to take into account when it comes to people who fall into line with usurping and extraction. If all else fails and these psychological avenues are closed, that leaves no choice but for people who want to further their aims of rape and pillage that forces them to default to physical dominance. And physical dominance and psychological dominance are both incredibly important factors when it comes to um, being aware of it and navigating it so that you could carry out a motion that a person who wants to do real right should should take into account. If you want to do real right, you should take into account psychological dominance and physical dominance. And you should prepare and fortify yourself against both. So Tesla had a little bit of both. Um, if what I understand about what I've learned is true, then psychological susceptibility to being taken advantage of happened in the case with Edison, where there was some trust, and that trust was placed in a person that, if Tesla had a higher conceptualization of discernment, then Edison would have never had the means to create what he created. My phone is dying. I knew my phone would be dying. That's why I brought my portable charger. Bam. Okay, it's slow charging, but it's charging. Yeah, slow charging is better than no charging. So I brought my portable, baby. We ready now? I mean, I did accidentally press the end button midway between this, which means I'll have to spend additional time merging the videos together before I post it, which will also take time. But okay, so my phone died. And my phone died because the charging cord that I was using for only 3 days decided that it just wasn't going to be a good cord anymore, and charged my phone so inefficiently that it's basically not charging. But it worked out because I got home and I got what I needed. So we're back here, and I have a book bag with heavy stuff in it around my body on the front side because I'm doing lazy training. That's my update. I was talking about Tesla. I was talking about conceptualizations of discernment, and I was bringing that up so that I could highlight the effectiveness of discernment and its abilities to protect from psychological warfare in a grand manner. There's other pillars, there's other ways to protect. Discernment is something that is extremely important. Also, even though the things that happen, we still wound up getting good things out of it. So, ah, that's why labeling a thing good or bad is just inefficient in a lot of scenarios. However, just because it's inefficient in a lot of scenarios, that doesn't mean there's a domain to which there is a good and bad, and it's extremely relevant to play with those two things when it comes to certain domains. So that is also discernment. It's like, when does good and bad really matter? When does it not? When is it a factor that should be prioritized or put to the forefront of awareness, and when is it not? Okay. The Crusade. There's been many different kinds of crusades, um, and those crusades create pressures that limit people and the ways in which they express themselves. I can go back to the witch hunt and how that has drastically um, created a chop at the knees for the expression of the feminine within the domain in which they are most accurately and naturally residing over. Witch hunt. Um, and now particular practices that could be done in a way that's beneficial, that could produce things, uh, forms of medicine, forms of communication, forms of communion that are beneficial. Those things are just completely taken out. And funny enough, because those things get taken out by particular factions with particular intentions, it's not that the art of witchcraft, so to say, just disappears. It's that it is now heavily influenced by the ethics and the incentives of the very people who do not like to see witches, I would say, that are committed to doing real right. So now the craft has, in a grand sense, been seized, just as many other crafts has been seized over time. I'm just going to use the craft of witches as one example. And because of their seizure, it's not even as though the art just disappears. It's just that the a lot of the beneficial aspects of the craft that would elevate the individual and the collective are just made either inaccessible, or they're framed to be not beneficial, they're framed to be foolish, they're framed to be unfruitful. A whole list of other things, to the point to where engaging in the craft with particular intentions that would actually benefit the collective and the individual are not even taken into consideration. Only the only the mannerisms that benefit the people who usurped it in the first place, those are what is acceptable as far as the craft of which is concerned. So much so to the point to where it's demonized both externally and internally, as far as from what I've been coming across. And that's one pillar, like that's just the craft of the witch. Um, Usurping tends to have that effect, especially since usurping is a tactic that only belongs to a particular kind of ethic that benefits particular kinds of families and cultures. Once something is usurped, it is highly likely that whatever that art is, it's going to have the parts of it that genuinely benefit the collective taken out, and then there will be a philosophy that's called the new way, or the updated way, the better way, and that better way will be aiming lower as far as the output, the input, and everything in between. So, I am I am coming from many years of study and intentional optimization as it relates to various crafts, alchemy, science, philosophy, spirituality, psychology. I am not by any means an expert in any one of these things. However, when it comes to bringing up the connections between these things in a manner that is not accessible to people who are more unidimensional, I do have a particular expertise. And that is something that I intend to use for breaking spells. And one of the spells has to do with framing magic as some sort of myth. It's a mythical thing. It's a faraway thing. It's something that is not made to be as relevant as it actually is when it comes to forces that are unseen that heavily impact the way we structure ourselves into society and the way that we shape and carve society as time progresses. Ooh, this bag on my body. It's really doing its job right now. Okay, so I'm adding in a lot of details, and I'm gonna tell 3 stories. I want to make sure I tell these 3 stories and add these details, hopefully not exceeding 2 hours. Ugh. Okay. So I went from Crusade. I went to Frame. It's a little bit of the value of reframing, and then I jump back to Crusades. Many Crusades. I mean, there are already people who are catching on and then highlighting very recent Crusades that have been undertaken. Um, I don't think it'd necessarily be beneficial to try to sit here and highlight all of them. But I do want to highlight enough to make a pattern that cannot be denied as it pertains to what I'm saying. And the fact that before we come to know ourselves, there are pressures that are so heavy, so weighted, that for it not to influence us is not necessarily a realistic thing. We're definitely influenced by it, and it's important for us to understand the fact that these are heavy influences, and that because they're heavy influences and there's intention mixed in with the heavy influences and a cunning mixed in with it, that does make it fall into the realm of magic and spell work. Moving on from that, to understand how to undo that spell work in a way that is not anything but practical, by way of breaking down how these magical things actually happen at, when it comes to physical, mental, psychological, spiritual influence. So, some forms of framing that I want to talk about actually has a lot to do with some things that are becoming very popular topics for these times, like the tactics of a manipulator, um, gaslighting, Darvo, deflection, denial, um, re redirection, um, blatant oversight. These are some of the ways in which frames that are not beneficial to the collective continue to flourish. After I tell these three stories, it is my intent that this is my hope that I would have given enough variation of detail to arm anyone who understands with the ability to cut through illusions, override illusions, step outside of illusions that they are in compliance with. I think that's the best way to say it. Because in order for a crusade to frame a particular class of people, whether it be through their attributes or their location, it is propagated by compliance. There is, again, because you may not be aware that a crusade has been carried out before you were born, and the crusade that was carried out before you were born has ideas, ideologies, philosophies that encourage, incentivize, validate the adherence to ways of showing up in the world consistently that do not benefit the individual or the collective. So, like I say, I already said that I'm a dead man, and the fact that I'm a dead man has heavy ties to what I'm describing right now, which is the fact that there have been so many various ways that a melanated man could be framed when he shows up with a particular stance, whether you want to call that masculine or firm or serious or just showing up in general. There's a frame for if I show up as there's an angry black man, and if I show up in that frame, there are people who are connected to ideologies and understandings that if I were to show up in that way, then I would be less valid in my experience as a human being. That's a very general way of putting it. Right? Because the frame has already been put there and it's already been propagated with so much intent outside of my say so, outside of my influence, outside of my representation. Um, if I show up in particular ways, if I express particular things without the knowledge of how those things were framed relative to my attributes, one of them being a melanated man, I'm just using one, then I find myself living a less masterful life. I find myself living a life in a way to where I'm not navigating as efficiently as I could be. More importantly, I'm not navigating in a beneficial way, in a higher beneficial way that serves me and the collective. And by the way, once you enter the realm of, for anyone who wants to do real right, once you enter the realm of the combination of doing for yourself and the collective, you afford yourself the ability to transform society in a way that influence society in a way that influence social structures in a way that um, create a domino effect in regards to real right. Part of what I'm describing requires one to assess who they are, where they come from, the history of where they come from, and the different frames and potential frames that exist in different parts of the world or different parts of a country or different parts of a town. It's um, it's important to take into account that there are different frames, and also if one becomes sovereign, they are in a position to attack these frames as opposed to yielding to them. They can attack and mold the frames. They can reshape them. These external frames, even though these aren't physical things and they reside in the minds, hearts, and spirits of other people, that does not change the sovereign individual's ability to take those things, shape it, mold it, reform it in a way that benefits the individual and the collective when it comes to doing real right, if that is the intent. Um, so yeah, I could just stay on the relative. I won't. I'm actually not gonna go outside of my culture. I'm just gonna ask that you transpose based on your experience. I could actually will plug in other frames, and I'll use the relative frames with the other frames, right? Because from more downtrodden neighborhoods, towns, um, poverty-stricken places, and usually poverty-stricken places are being attacked in subtle ways that point to a nature of sabotage. Very careful, very drawn out, intense, intense and subtle. It's quite a combination. Sabotage. So there's a degree to which the effect of poverty is not the responsibility of the people who are in poverty. However, the capacity to affect how these people respond and navigate in the effect of poverty. I forgot how I was going to finish that up, but these people in particular situations with right education, with right support, they will remember, come into contact, um, realize, actualize their natural capacity to affect the things that contribute to the circumstances that affect their lives. So there are different frames, and frames are a assisted by labels. Like a label that is a misnomer is black man because black is so reductionistic. And a label that is also a misnomer is white because white is so reductionist. Reductionist? Reductionist? You get what I'm saying? I'm going to look up this word later. What I'm trying to say is by using these labels, we are reducing upon the utterance of these words the possibilities of how we show up and how we represent ourselves. Because if I'm a black man, I have certain things attributed to me, both as an understanding of other black men and people who are not considered black. And the same applies to white men. There are things attributed to me that are understood in agreement, understood in agreement with other white men and also people who are not white. So if I'm black or I'm a minority, right? I'm just gonna stick to the labels and use quotations because there's a higher language that can be used that I look forward to being able to use after I break these spells. There's a dynamic in which if a white man comes into a certain part of town, that he would be attributed rich and affluent and in the position to assist monetarily people who are within poverty. And that's a frame. It's a reductionist frame to the white man. It reduces him to someone who can only create change through monetary ways. The same way a black man is reduced to a barbarian or an unstable element by way of one particular frame, which is the anger and the the unfolding of the anger and its effects, right? So for a melanated man, even holding a stance that holding an energy that shows that you have the capacity to be angry can be something that can be very intimidating for particular people with particular understandings. And I don't know what the contrast for a white guy would be to that, but I'm sure people who are in the culture would do a better job of transposing than I am. But I know that white people aren't only people who can change things through monetary ways. There are the things that lead one to making money, and that's actually a multitude of things like the capacity to be disciplined, the capacity to ask questions, the capacity to ask questions frequently, the capacity to ask the right questions of the right people, knowing where to go to ask so that you can get the best of what you ask for. Um, Many things that have to do with money. Holding firm, holding firm, having having a proposition, um, feeling comfortable with negotiation. These are not things that are solely attributed to white people, however, because of the way that culture is set up and and its subtle nature. It just so happens that if you are um, perpendicular to whiteness, then you will find yourself being aided with these sorts of values and understandings. And if you are melanated or a minority, you will have to work harder to not only find these concepts of negotiation, the concepts of asking questions, these concepts of making eye contact and standing firm and things like that. Not only will they be made to be less accessible, but after being made less accessible, you will have to work harder to work them into your character because you don't have the same perpendicular nature to whiteness that would allow you to assume that role, assume that stance, because there are so many external um, markers that support you to hold that frame. So you're covered in external markers that support you, demand of you to hold those frames, to make it foolish to not hold those frames. So that is cultural cultural. You say it's class, but it's also being perpendicular to particular kinds of ideologies. It's a mixture of things. And there's a pro to every con, like people who are closer to poverty tend to have a greater capacity to enjoy life in its fullness, which is extremely important. It's a pillar of life. And people who have the other side, which is like monetary consciousness and pressures and supports and yeah, things of that nature, they will be afforded the ability to demand of things, to negotiate for things. Like there's different points of access for both people that like they wouldn't have access to. Like okay, I seen funny videos about like a white girl trying to a person who shows up as white, as far as we're concerned, um, receiving instruction from a person who shows up as black on how to firmly express themselves in, I would say, an abrasive manner, but to defend oneself verbally in a firm manner. Like that is something that black women are kind of known for. They're known for standing up for moral injustices on the spot with a particular gumption, with a particular gusto. And that has a lot to do with the culture that they grow up in. What's necessary to survive, what's necessary to make sure that you can actually make progress relative to where you come from. That's different from what's necessary from people who are coming from a different culture could be considered white. Whereas progress more so requires you to keep your mouth shut about things. Progress requires you to go along with the go along. Progress requires you to understand what the rules are and to fall in line with it unequivocally and to demean anyone in a various amount of ways who doesn't fall in line with those values. Case. All right. So I've spoken about crusades. Everything that I just spoke about, there have been crusades to remove black people from their voice, and that hasn't really been working out so well in the grand scheme of things. And there have been crusades to make white people feel guilty about their their support and the knowledge that they have to navigate in particular ways in relation to negotiation and asking for particular things from particular people, like, but that hasn't worked out really well as well. Some crusades are weak crusades, and that's just what it is, because a crusade that tries to focus on taking away from as opposed to uplifting will always require more energy and will always put it will always put more power in the progress of the crusade in the hands of people who would go against the crusade. So tying that back to a big part of the crusade is delegation. If if we're living in a digital age after the industrial revolution and everything is becoming more automatized, and the digital age after coming the automatization of everything, the digital age makes um, everything more closer because I can appear on a screen. I can record this video. I can be all over the world at once, and that applies to everyone else. So if I want to start a crusade, this is one of the most interesting times to do. The nature of the crusade is changing in that because I have so much more access in a quicker amount of time. It's the range of access and it's the amount of time that that access can actually be met that changes the game as far as the crusade is concerned. Now, if I want to impose emotion, if I want to present emotion, I can very well do that to the entire world in a manner that has never been accessible before, where you had to ride horses way, way back, or in Tesla's time, where in order to get the word out there, it would help to go out to like a town hall or some social space where there's a lot of people and hold a demonstration, things of that nature, to attract people to this motion that you're carrying, doing things with light, doing things with magnetism, showing people higher forms of science, and doing that publicly. Okay, the newspaper was an evolution. It was a step forward in. It was like a step. That's one of the steps. So it's like, oh, before newspapers, the access and the time that it takes to make that influence, the range that that influence could reach, that wasn't the same before the newspaper. Newspapers are still very relevant right now. They, despite what you think, people still read them, and they're still relevant. But prior to that time, prior to the newspaper access to someone's motion that they're putting forward, it was it was taking a different form. You had to work harder to make impact. You had to put in more effort to make an impact. You had to do more. You had to spend more time consistently to do more. And then a newspaper came along, and now people are getting updates. And then the radio came along, and now people are in their house. They're getting audio updates. They're hearing things. You know, you still have to put in some work. You have to turn the dial, tune into a specific channel. Now on our phones, it's just channel. That's what doom scrolling comes in. It's just channels and channels of not only audio input but visible input, like optic input. These are very important things to take into account when it comes to how nefarious forces can use these things to propagate their motions. Also, how sovereign individuals who want to do real right in the world can make impact. The same goes for both parties. It's just up to the people who want to do real right to spread the word and empower others to do real right, because without that, everything defaults to systems that usurp and extract. Usurping and extraction and pillage and rape is the default because psychological and physical domination are extremely effective. That's just the way things are. There has to be an implementation of another model by many parties in order to counteract the culture that is default, which is rape, pillage, usurp, extraction. Oh, this bag on my front. Oh, it's really. I don't think it's doing the good. Am I breathing? Make sure I breathe through my back. Okay, breathing through the back. Training. I got like 2 5-pound dumbbells in this bag with some other stuff. Okay, so I did a lot to describe the general nature of the word crusade from the viewpoint of this universe, the human element. And I feel complete in that between the first and the second. And I'm going to jump back to the reframe. And I'm going to jump back to the reframe by telling 3 stories. And these 3 stories, they all have to do with police officers, authority. And some of you may not know, there is a history between police officers, authority, and melanated people. So I have some very, very interesting input as far as the dynamics are concerned when these 3 stories are unfolding and how I navigated these situations. I'm pretty sure after I tell these 3 stories, the stories will speak for themselves, and I will not need to add any additional words for the concept of the reframe. However, I may add a little salt bay at the end of the 3 stories. See how I'm feeling. Story time. Okay. The first story that I want to tell there's a good order for this. There's a good order for this. Okay. First story is a very short, recent story. It happened 3 days ago. Yeah, it happened about 3 days ago. I usually get up 3:30 in the morning, so I can leave my house around 3:45, and I can be on the train that I need to take to go to work at 4 o'clock, so I could get to work at 5. So I get up early. I'll be working early morning. I don't have to, add extra details on this. So basically, I've been doing really good at waking up in this early morning without like needing to take naps on a train or anything like that. Like when I was adjusting to the time when I first started working, it was definitely a struggle. But now I generally wake up with a good amount of energy in the morning, providing I do like stretches and drink water the night before and stuff like that. Providing I treat myself well, I wake up with a good amount of energy. even so, on this particular day, I was on a train. I had to take a different train. I had to take a different train. Usually I take the J. It's in New York. Usually I take the J, and J will take me straight to where I need to go to. But it was a weekend. Trains were running like they usually do, and so I took a different train, the A. Why am I mentioning this? Well, because different train lines tend to have different calibers of people, especially depending on which part of the train line you're on. So, coming from where I'm coming from, uh, there is a caliber of melanated people who are, I would say, not accustomed to seeing um, an empowered melanated person such as myself, to the point to where it makes people uncomfortable very deeply. It makes people think very deeply. It makes people ponder very deeply. It makes people feel things differently just by way of my presence, because my presence is deeply in contrast with the somatic orientation that is mostly predominant within the area. So I'm speaking to a different somatic orientation right now. Like, my nervous system is built differently because I work to make it that way. So usually when I'm disturbed like when I'm awake, when I'm standing, when I'm fully taking on, like, usually I'm disturbed in more awake awakened states. Like I'm more conscious. I was like tired this morning, you know? And I wasn't necessarily sleeping. I was just closing my eyes, meditating on the train. And of course this had to happen coming from the Broadway Junction area because police officers in that area are used to particular kinds of interactions with particular calibers of people, which I am not. So, at one point, I wasn't meditating the whole time on the train. I got on a train. I was pretty much just like there, and then I was like, kind of need to close my eyes. So the way the train was before I closed my eyes and the way the train was after I closed my eyes was different. And that makes a lot of sense because meditating is an extremely useful tool when it comes to um, affecting the environment in really impactful ways. Meditation is extremely, extremely valuable in impacting the environment. For an individual to impact the environment in an extremely grand way, meditation is good for that. So it made sense that the train felt one way or looked one way, or there were certain kinds of people that weren't around me and were around me before I opened my eyes. Before I closed my eyes and then after I opened my eyes. Maybe I'm adding too much detail to the story. Anyway, imagine you're on a train, you decide to close your eyes. It looks alright, people just on a train. And then, after meditating for about 2, 3 stops, you hear, because I'm sitting by the bars, I got the good seat. I got the seat by the end, where the bars are. So if I wanted to, I could have laid against the bar and rested my head, but I wasn't doing that. I was just meditating. I was awakened by this police officer using his baton to bang on the bars that were next to me. It was a clinking sound that gradually increased over time. So it took him a couple clanks, a few clanks, for me to realize that there was an external presence that was intentionally making noise. I opened my eyes. My rest was disturbed. I don't like having my rest disturbed. If my rest is disturbed, it should be for a good reason. This officer did not have a good reason for disturbing my rest. When I open my eyes, he tells me, you can put your phone in your pocket. When I was meditating, I had my phone, I was holding my phone with both my hands in front of my person, intentionally away from my crotch because I'm aware of the phone's radiation. I try my best not to keep it in my pocket when I don't need to have it in my pocket for the intentional reasons of its radiation and the fact that I like to keep my organs away from such effects. So he came in with his very real world ignorance, disturbing my sleep, telling me that I can put my phone in my pocket. Factor: there are many other people on the train with their phones in their hands. And having the phone in your hand is not something that is like, you don't need to instruct someone or tell someone that they can put it in your pocket. I guess just, I'm not going to add any other details somewhere. That's like a very weird request, right? It's just weird. I could sense that it would have been to his liking if I was leaning up against the bars, something that police tend to do on the MTA transit is when a homeless person or a person who appears as homeless, when a person who appears as homeless is resting on a train and taking up space or whatever, these officers will come in and they will come near this person banging their baton on the bars to get them to wake up and to sit up, which is annoying, I'm sure, for the person who appears homeless. But they have more jurisdiction to make that decision and to have that decision be a valid thing than what this particular officer did to me, which was step out of his jurisdiction. Why did this officer step out of his jurisdiction? Clearly stating me to, he clearly instructed me to do something that was not taking me away from any obstruction whatsoever. Like a person laying on the subway seats could technically be validated as an obstruction because they're taking up seats. That would make sense. They are in the jurisdiction to make such a request or a demand, even. He wanted to demand me. That's what he wanted to do. He wanted to demand me, understanding that on average, a person who is approached by an authority will yield to their request or their demand. It just so happens that he's seen me, my meditative state, minding my business with my eyes closed, not leaning up against the bars that were next to me to rest my head upon, but just sitting up straight in a meditative state with my eyes closed. took it upon himself to come and help me out. That was his. He knew he didn't have the jurisdiction to make a demand, and the stance that he took when he was talking to me was not the stance of a demand because he knew very well he couldn't get away with that. Though, just based on the fact that he did what he did, I know for a fact psychologically that he was threatened by me in some manner, threatened by the way that I show up, threatened by my firmness, threatened by my stability in the way that I show up, in the way that I have framed myself, the way that I have intentionally worked and toiled to genuinely show up as, in essence, this essence that I have held threatened him, made him feel inferior, made him feel challenged, or made him feel compelled to challenge me. So much so because of whatever insecurities that he has, that he woke me up out of my sleep, knowing that he couldn't make a demand, instead deciding to take the stance of someone who is trying to help me, someone who cares about me. He taps on the bars and tells me, hey, you can put your phone in your pocket. My response was to make eye contact with him. My eyes didn't break from him as I gradually shook off the state that I was in from my meditation. He was able to witness me come from my meditative state to a state of awareness while I was making eye contact with him. I didn't say anything. What I did was I spoke to him. I didn't say anything, but I spoke to him. He made a request. He made a request outside of his jurisdiction, knowing that he was wrong, or at least after I responded, knowing that he was wrong and that he could be made to feel foolish for it, at the very least. Because he already knew he was wrong, he just never was anticipating that he could be made to feel foolish for it. What he was anticipating was to satiate that insecurity that he had by way of using his power to come over to awaken me, to give me a command of any kind. Any command he could possibly justify would satisfy him to watch me fall in alignment with that command. Because my essence outranked his. He has physical rank, authority. I have authority in essence. My authority in essence is akin to the people that he answers to. People in Masonic lodges, people who carry themselves in particular kinds of manner, people who can lead people, people who can lead people in large numbers. These people, like myself, have a particular kind of essence that speaks for itself. He decided that he would test that essence. And I decided that I would respond to him with my essence and let him make the decision as to how that interaction would unfold. So, after he gave me the request and I responded and spoke to him with silence and awareness and holding firm to my essence and the way that I felt, he responded by saying, oh, okay, not gonna do it? All right. And then his body language changes. I can almost see his body language before he approaches me. I can't speak to it because my eyes were closed. But I'm sure that prior to coming to bang on the bars, he was in a stance of feeling firm in his motions. He was more firm. However, after walking away, after I did not heed his request, my arms did not move. My hands stayed on my phone, intentionally keeping that phone away from my sensitive region. I spoke by many ways, not saying words. I spoke by not heeding his request. I spoke by maintaining eye contact while coming outside of my meditative state and coming into awareness of the fact that my sleep was disturbed for a stupid reason. I let him come in contact with that change in state while making eye contact with him. And his very wise response was to back away. He literally put his hand up. Now, why would a police officer put his hand up and back away if he didn't just get through doing something he wasn't supposed to do and it didn't go the way he thought it was going to go? He assumed that my essence of sovereignty, perhaps, wasn't a real essence. And when I responded with the real essence of sovereignty, he folded. And had he not folded, he would have been publicly shamed. He would have spider on my arm. He would have had his rank challenged openly in a way to where whoever was present would sense that his physical authority was not as heavy as he would like it to be. His wise decision was to back away, continue on with his business. I stared him down and made sure that while he was walking with his body language showing signs of distress and discomfort, I made sure that if he was to look at me, he could see the fury in my eyes and disappointment. But he never turned back. That's story number one. Story number one, lessons, hold frame. Lessons. Know the jurisdiction of a person and when they are stepping outside of it. Do not yield to a person stepping outside of the jurisdiction. Story number two. Story number two also has to do with me holding my frame. Oh yeah, I gotta breathe through my back. What's that? Ah, okay. I got a text from my lady friend. Story number two has to do with holding frame as well. And it has to do with showing up for another. There are ethics Um, actually, I'm gonna tell these two stories and I'm just gonna go off. I'm getting tired of filling in gaps for people who should have more sense. So I'm gonna wrap this up, and because I'm gonna wrap this up, I'm actually gonna have way more zest and life in the way that I describe these stories. I'm gonna use zest and life to describe these stories, as opposed to additional outside information. So tell me how, like, I'm at like 14th Street Union Square, and there's these vendors outside, and these vendors are getting bullied. I've been in New York for some time, and I've got to see its changes. It's very interesting. It's very interesting to see how particular vendors from a particular kind of culture, like, get harassed and others don't. It's very interesting. So if a vendor comes out, maybe their tents, they come out with tents. The tents are a little bit dingy. They come out with a table. The table isn't necessarily like the cleanest looking table. It's not a perfect table. Maybe one leg is shorter than the rest, and it has a lean on it. Either way, there are these things that these people come out to do to make money, and they're not doing anything different as far as operations and the way that they're set up, in comparison to the newer people who are coming into New York City, who have things that look a little bit cleaner. Maybe their things are organized in a way that's more visually appealing, and they have products that are a little bit outside of the norm from what is native to New York. These people are not. These people who have their setups a little bit different. These people who are newer, they're not receiving pressures from the law or disrespect or um, attack or cuts from the law in a way that the people who have been here the longest would receive. I think that's very strange. It's something that came to mind when I first seen these vendors who are more native to New York than not being harassed by police. I was a witness to a kind of injustice, an injustice that could be dignified with business as usual. I have to do what I have to do. I received orders and you have to go, right? Without the presence of one sovereign individual, dynamics that are not in service to the people who benefit the collective the most and who have been in the collective for the longest. These people are attacked. They're systematically bullied. I think that is so interesting. I think it's a very interesting thing. It was so interesting that, as opposed to doing what everyone would have done, I decided to bear witness. When I bear witness to this injustice, or something that seemed like an injustice because it involved police officers getting physical with one of the vendors, trying to physically remove him from his place of sales. There was an angle that I had that allowed me to that angle that I took that allowed me to view all of what happened. I didn't record. What I did was I held my frame as a bystander. I showed care, I showed interest, and I showed fortitude in that I would not leave simply because something uncomfortable was happening, simply because something was happening that did not directly affect me. What I decided to do was I decided to watch. I had my guitar in my back at the time, and this seemed to be going on for a duration that was longer than what I would like it to be. So at some point, I decided to take my guitar off my back and just stand still. No recording. Eventually, from my standing there and bearing witness, people became involved. I do not believe without sovereign attention, without sovereign holding of a frame to support one another when there seems to be injustice, I do not believe that without that one person, without that one essence, that there would be a cascade of right effects. I don't believe that. Because what happened, what ensued after, was a cascade of right effects. I did my part. What I did was I held the frame of someone who would not waver. I held the frame of someone who was not afraid to look at what was going on. I was not afraid to make eye contact with the officers. I was not afraid for them to meet my disappointment in my eyes. I was not afraid for them to meet my disgust in my eyes. Disappointment, disgust. Disappointment in my stance, in the way that I was holding my frame, in the way that I looked at them. I was disappointed. I was disgusted. There was an element of disgrace that I was translating to each and every one of these officers who, when they met my eyes, they shifted, they turned away, they turned their backs. And that in of itself is part of doing real right. Prior to me doing what I did, which is just standing there, I had dealt with particular challenges in my life in a way to where I did not run away from them. If I had ran away from them, I would not have been able to do my job, which is stand there with disgust, disgrace, disappointment, and standing with fortitude of another man who appeared to be in distress, who appeared to be bullied. I came in as he was being bullied, so I didn't have the context necessary to know what was going on. That's why I stood there for a substantial amount of time to gain an idea of what was going on. I needed to know what was going on. I didn't. It seemed like a man was being bullied, but if I was the type of guy to just jump in there, I would be an assumptive, uneducated, sovereign, aspiring individual as opposed to a sovereign, embodied individual. I need to make sure that what's happening right now is what it actually seems like. So, a very interesting thing in this story that I want you to take away because it's very important. Police officers, just like anyone else, do a job, and if you do a job long enough, you can default to this is just the way things are done. But it's very interesting. There's two parts of a job. There is the job that is done on paper, and the way that is done on paper has a lot to do with doing things that benefit the people. You know, you can take that to an extreme that's very annoying, but it does have to do with benefiting the people. And then there's a part of the job that you can default to when you don't want to do any of the work. And that pathway has easier ways, but it creates a lot of discord in the environment, both internal and external. When you consider your job as business as usual and you take shortcuts with your job and you you take orders from the job that are weird orders, or orders that are outside of the jurisdiction of what you should be doing, or orders that, yeah, just weird orders that don't take into account all the factors that need to be taken into account, because it's easier to do that way because you don't want to do the paperwork and XYZ. What you contribute to is internal degradation, internal corruption, and external corruption. However, you have more control over the internal corruption because you are the one that are representing whatever job, company, group that you are representing. In this particular instance, the job is police officer. So there is two things happened simultaneously in this interaction. There was the bullying, which is pacified by the assumption that people don't care about the people that they're bullying. See, they're bullying a man who they believe to be alone. No one cares about this man. This man is a nuisance. The people who gave these officers the orders to remove him, and the people who gave these orders that view this man as a nuisance. The people who were not here for as long as this nuisance was, they want this nuisance removed because they want things to be cleaner. They have the ability to influence these officers to take action, to put pressure on them to do their jobs, which is to listen to the people who have the ability to give them the orders. That's one part of the job. So they were acting from one part of doing the job, one part of business as usual. Interesting how after I was standing there was another man who eventually came next to me and started recording. He was doing the right job. After he started recording, there was eventually a crowd of people that came to witness. I was not necessarily looking at the crowd, though I did sense them form over time. It was first me standing, disgraced, disgusted, disappointed, and then the other man who I'm sure without my firmness wouldn't have felt comfortable recording. That's a very, very important thing to take away from this. As it pertains to doing real right, showing up for people who are bullied, showing up for people who do vast good for both themselves and the environments that they are most connected to. It changed from them doing business as usual, which means take orders from someone who wants to remove this man or bully this man under shaky grounds. And then they started doing another kind of job, which is the job they were actually supposed to do. Because after people started bearing witness, they started playing by the book, which is another aspect of their job. The sergeant came. The sergeant came. The sergeant had to come because people cared and people were witnessing. If people didn't care and people weren't witnessing, it would have been another kind of business as usual. And that man would have been bullied, and he would have been bullied without proper repercussion or proper justice. However, because there were so many witnesses, I didn't even know this, but at the end of it, I found out that he was being bullied. He was in the right to press charges, and he already said that he was going to press charges for this officer and the perversion of the use of force under shaky grounds, under unjust grounds. So what is the difference between a man who is essentially doing what everyone else is doing, just in a different way? A way that is not unjust. He is not obstructing in any real sense of the word. He's not making any real unlawful obstructions, just as I wasn't the first time in the first story. I was not making any real unlawful obstructions that did not prevent the attempt to exert control or to have some sort of dominance over, whether that be psychological or physical. In the first story, there was a presence of a sovereign individual, and the sovereign individual was me. That's all that's necessary. Sovereign in essence. There's different forms of sovereignty that, as far as paperwork is concerned, I'm pretty sure I'm out of alignment. That's not necessary because I have the essence. The essence trumps. The essence is higher in rank than the physical rank. So the difference between this man being bullied and not having any justice for it was my presence, or a presence of my caliber, a presence that has the wherewithal to witness, and witness with appropriate emotion, hold frame without diminishing very valid emotion, hold frame, created a cascading effect where someone felt comfortable to record. And after someone feels comfortable to record, people who are witnessing, they start to see that something is happening that they should care about. The combination of me standing the way that I was standing, the way that I was feeling, without there being any obstruction to how I was feeling. The fact that the person standing next to me was enabled from the holding of that frame to feel comfortable after some point. It did take him about 5 minutes or so, but he eventually came to the point where I should probably record. And then after recording, people started gathering around us, and the people around me didn't really take me away from the fact that I was eyeing down every single one of those officers, just reading them to see how they felt about it. They didn't feel good about it. They didn't feel good about it. They certainly didn't feel good about the fact that their physical rank had no precedence over the fact that my emotions were real emotions. My frame, my divine sovereign essence, the fact that I felt that someone was being wronged, and the fact that I held true to that, and I let that, and I stayed in that stance, had a lot to do with the cascading effect of them being recorded, them being viewed in a certain manner, which is being in the wrong. Before, business as usual, if no one comes to bear witness with a particular essence, the witness and the essence matters. Frustration, disappointment, disgust while witnessing. Also, recording is a big part of it. So the combination of those things change this dynamic from we are doing our job as usually as it should be done to get rid of someone who is in the wrong, and they can get away with that because optics. It depends on who's around, who really cares. If no one cares, then people get raped, pillaged, and usurped. The difference between a rampant culture of rape and pillage, usurping and extraction, is the capacity to hold the frame and validation and honor of one's genuine, relevant, valid emotion that holds far more rank than the unjust cause for this bullying. Because we come from these places, we understand what's happening as bullying. But because there's so many new people around who don't really have that same emotional tether, we can't rely on those people to hold pressure to unjust to injustice because they cannot see it as injustice. Furthermore, they may not feel incentivized to see it as injustice. Just because someone doesn't see it as injustice or unjust, does that mean you have to invalidate your own feelings? Does that mean you have to yield to injustice? Does that mean you have to allow cultures of rape and pillage to evolve and come closer to your home over time without doing anything? Is that what that means? I don't think so. I think you can do something about it. And I don't think you have to do anything drastic. I think I think if you learn how to do the most important things first, the drastic things won't be necessary. Such as in the first story, where I could have cursed the cop out, or I could have asked for an apology and dragged it out even though it was 5 o'clock in the morning and I really just wanted to rest for work. It already got to that point because he was in handcuffs. They were roughing him up. They were about to just rough him up in public because they could. And it didn't feel bad until someone else feel bad and made them feel the feelings that they felt that this that I was disgusted. My disgust, my disappointment transferred over time. It transferred to other people because they realized what they were witnessing as opposed to maybe just walking by and then guessing, well, that doesn't have anything to do with me. So did he get roughed up? Yeah, but he got roughed up, and it was ensured that through getting that roughed up nature, that there were plenty of witnesses that there was an injustice. The sergeant came, he heard what happened, he understood that what happened was an injustice. He understood on the higher level of things that what happened was exactly what happened. They tried to overexert their power. They stepped outside of their jurisdiction. And it just so happened that people who cared were around. Sergeant understood that. Sergeant also understood that if people who didn't care was around, he wouldn't have gotten called out there and he could have gone about that day. So what else does that mean? Well, that means that the next time these officers do this particular thing, because there was consequences, like taking time out of their sergeant's day to hear that they were caught acting outside of their jurisdiction, maybe, perhaps, they will consider what they will do right the next time, as opposed to taking advantage of someone who they perceive to be not so valuable. Perhaps. And perhaps, most likely, that's all that's necessary. Perhaps all that's necessary is for us to make people think twice about their injustices. To make people uncomfortable is the solution in these particular. If you don't have the capacity to enter discomfort and uncomfort when it's necessary, then what you are doing is you are contributing to the propagation of age old tactics that evolve in nefarious ways of rape, pillage, usurpation, and extraction. Second story done. Third and final story. I remember I was speaking about the kind of leader that I wanted to be and how I didn't want to be the kind of leader who I don't want to be the kind of leader who picks bad followers. I worded it differently the first time. Oh my God. Uh, oh, that was. I might have hurt my shoulders with that one. So, feels so much better. I don't want to be the kind of leader who has particular kinds of followers. Like, I'm very picky about my followers. I only want certain kinds of followers, like reliable followers, sensible followers, people who won't be subject to um, doubting me and my capabilities by not understanding how to properly assess my capabilities. Because some people only see value through the ways that they can progress within their particular culture or their world, so to speak. They don't have a universal sense of value. They don't have a universal sense of capability. So if I'm universally capable, if my capabilities expand into multiple domains, it is to my detriment to invest heavy amounts of time into followers who are more unidimensional. There will come a time to where I'm doing things that make sense in a very broad manner, in a very long term manner. And because they're short sighted and unidimensional, they will come to doubt me. They will come to distrust me when things change in a drastic manner because times always change. And when times change, the manner of navigation also must change so that your, your navigation remains true and effective. If your navigation is to remain true and effective, you're going to have to be like a very, very good pilot. A pilot that understands how to do things when everything is running right, when all systems are go, when all the communications are working. A pilot knows what to do. An amazing pilot knows how to make calls, judgment calls, in emergency situations where there's not access to particular kinds of communications or support in the air. That's an amazing pilot. Imagine being in the presence of an amazing pilot who is going to guide you out of an unfortunate emergency situation. And because you're so distrustful of the manner in which navigation has to change, you wind up getting everybody killed. It's a very real scenario. The pilot is the pilot. If the pilot is an amazing pilot, the pilot will assess the nature of the challenging situations and they will adjust the way that they are supposed to navigate to the way that they normally navigate to the way that makes most sense to navigate relative to the change in circumstance. That's an amazing pilot. An amazing pilot has different modes of operation. I understand that in normal average situations, this is protocol. This is the right way to do things. However, we are not in those circumstances. Manual override, evasive maneuver. I've trained for this. I've trained for these emergencies. I don't want to have unidimensional followers. I don't want to be foolish enough to invest my time with unidimensional followers because I will prove time and time again that I have broad long-term value, and because they're so unidimensional, the only thing they can offer me after years of service is doubt and distrust and calling me crazy and wondering if I'm going through some sort of mental decline. When in actuality, these people are extremely, extremely uneducated and they will always be in need when times change in a very real manner for an amazing pilot. I want to be an amazing pilot to people who value amazing pilots. And the people who are more unidimensional, I feel that they should be left to whatever fate that they are susceptible to because they believe that they're so smart. That's how I feel about it. I'm ready to leave people behind and pick certain people up in a way that's more in accordance with my internal frame. So, final story. Friends who I am no longer in contact with. Friends who I respect less now than I did before. Friends who, by the real world is concerned, are dead to me. Friends whose names have been tossed in the trash bin of the computer of my mind. These friends I've known for more than 10 years, more than 12 years, more than 13 years. I've had a long shared history with these people. And there have been, just like when I was describing that anime reference, there have been many times to where I've demonstrated um, the ability to make extremely sound decisions. To I've I've made myself known as an extremely valuable, capable pilot, capable of switching modes when emergencies show up. These people came to doubt me in my mental orientation, specifically because I'm choosing to do things that make them uncomfortable, which is something that a pilot would do in an emergency situation anyway. So it's good that I'm here. I'm not telling the story yet. I should be saying this after the story. Oh man, I'm ranting. Okay, so basically, this was back when I was wearing more flashy clothes. Still kind of wearing flashy clothes, but the flashy clothes that I was wearing was more synonymous with the hood than not. Like because I grew up in Flatbush and I started getting certain kind of clothes, and I happened to be wearing this particular sweater that had markings on it that after after we were approached by the police, I realized that my sweater highlighted me as someone who could be framed as a particular kind of melanated person. I could be framed as a gang member. I could be framed as someone affiliated with particular kinds of ties for wearing this sweater. And it was only after I got approached by these police along with my friends that I was like, oh, you know what? Yeah, it was definitely the sweater. So here's the story. Hang on, let me see if I can see in the background here. You see how far like the block down there is? Like you can't really see the sidewalk. The sidewalk isn't that far from here. I don't know if you can see the sidewalk, but can I zoom in? No, I can't zoom in. The sidewalk's not that far, but it's far enough to where, in order to see me, you'd have to like be looking, right? At the same time, if I'm wearing a shirt like this, that's colorful and I'm in a particular neighborhood, I'm gonna stand out, right? So even from down the block, you see a particular kind of patterns, particular kind of colors. You're like, hmm, this guy's different, and then you can decide or assume why I'm different, right? It just so happened that I was wearing a sweater with patterns that could definitely be related to the gang or could reasonably lead some officer to believe that there's a chance to come up off of me because it looks like I'm highly likely to be involved with something. So it's funny, like we're really not that close to the sidewalk, and I'm speaking with two of the two guy friends, one of the girlfriends, right? We're walking, and we're doing banter. It just so happens that I'm the only one that notices. Why is there a fly on my phone? It just so happens that I'm the only one that notices towards the end of the block that there was a car that stopped right in front of us, way down the block. It just stopped on like that corner, and then it kind of backed up, and then like did a loop around, and I seen that, and I was like, you know, the place that the car parked, it was like right on the corner, blocking like pedestrian walkways onto the corner, so it was not a sensible place to park it. It clearly spoke to me that whoever was in that car seen us and decided that they were going to line up in that spot so they can have the angle to watch us. And I was like, interesting, because there's no other reason for you to park directly in that place where people have to access the sidewalk. They're blocking the sidewalk access by parking on the corner in the way that they parked in the corner. Very, very overtly. So we start getting towards the end of the corner, and it just so happens that my assumption was right. I didn't break from the banter at all. I kind of just kept the banter up. We were walking, we were talking, laughing, ping ponging, going back and forth, whatever you want to call it. Good time. However, we get to the end of the corner, and it just so happens that the police decided they want to come out of this car and pressure us. This one is going to be rather short. That's why I was speaking so around it. So they come out, they pressure us. It was like 3 or 4 of them. I'm holding firm because I'm very interested in why they were so adamant and interested in us. I was waiting for them to say more words, to give more details as to their interest before I said any words whatsoever. My friends were showing the body language of being scared, uncomfortable, and displaced. I, however, was more interested in the reason to why we were stopped. After these 3, 4 police officers, they were basically telling us to wait, because when they initially came out, they asked where I was going, and we gave very clear-cut answers. We were coming from hanging out, and we were going home. They asked where we were coming from. They asked where we was going to. I forgot where we was hanging out at, but we told them, and then we told them it was like right down the block, and then we told them that we were on our way home, and then they kind of very clear-cut answering the questions. Like, yeah, we're just on our way home right now. What's up? And it's like, oh, so you guys are just on your way home? Yeah. And it's like, oh, all right. And it's like, so can we go? And they're like, hang on a second. So they hold us. They make us wait. In addition to the one car, 2 cars pull up, more officers, which is supposed to be more pressure. And then maybe 5 minutes later, 3 more cars pull up. Officers come out of the car, they're standing out the car, they're looking at us. And then 5 minutes after that, 3 more cars pull up. So basically, they're taking up a whole bunch of space in the middle of the block. 10, 11 police cars. They all come, after they come, they are standing outside of the police cars and they're waiting. And I'm in full control of the situation because I'm holding firm and I'm looking at all these officers the same way that I was looking at the officers when they were taking advantage of that man. This was years ago, so I guess I just have a naturally sovereign orientation. Or I'm compelled to hold sovereign frames. I feel that is important. Within my heart of hearts, I feel that that's important and necessary. And it's proven to be so to me in my experience. But yeah, 11 police cars pull up. We don't really need 11 police cars for 3 guys and 1 girl, right? It's like pretty unnecessary. And then the grounds for which they're doing that, they didn't really give grounds for it. We told them we were coming from somewhere. We told them that we were going home. We spoke in very plain language. We didn't say that we don't answer questions or anything like that. We're cooperative and cool cooperative. Answer the questions in a way that shut down the questions rather quickly. They still felt it was necessary to bring out three plus, three plus, three plus cars and have all these officers stand around to pressure us. And they pressured them. They were already, my friends were pressured in the first interaction, but they could have brought the whole. I don't even know who the whole squad was. I would love to talk to the whole squad. And it's just like, you guys bored? I want to know. Like, I want to know. I'm interested in why you brought all this force out here. I maintained a stance of being disinterested. That was the stance that spoke to me as a stance to maintain, because I could tell that the intent was to pressure me or to scare me. Also, at this time, still had the knowledge that um, police officers answer to people in Masonic orders, and these people understand things about karmic law and things of that nature, and they understand essence. They understand essence. They're wary of essence. And so I just held my essence in the way that I felt needed to be held, which is an essence of disinterest. Because for me, feeling the way that I felt, knowing the things that I know, all I wanted to know was, can I go now? And whether they needed to bring 11 additional cop cars or 20, that was still going to be my general energy and question after they felt that they brought out whatever needed brought out. And it's like, all right, got all the cars here. Everybody's standing outside the cars. Per car, there's like 4 or 5 officers. 11 times 5. It's a lot of bullying going on unnecessarily. Can we go now? I guess after they brought out, that 11th car, and I maintained the frame, I was looking at them, waiting, disinterested. Can we go now? And it's like, yeah, you guys can go now. What a waste of our time. This story is a little bit different from the rest in that all I really did was cooperate, remain disinterested, and stay in tune with the fact that they really didn't have anything to go with. They checked my ID. I don't have any outstanding records or anything like that. No warrants, no tickets. And they weren't even asking for that. They just were interested. Must have been interesting for them to come in contact with the way I express myself. Because I express myself like this naturally, like an intelligent man. So if they were profiling me from down the street from a distance to where they couldn't even see my essence, assuming that they were going to come across someone who was not sovereign, who was uneducated, and they ran into a man like me, it must have been a ground shaking thing. It must have been a destabilizing thing. They couldn't have accounted for the fact that they were going to come across a man who spoke well and was educated and firm. That is not the combination of things that they were expecting when they were profiling. When they framed me the way that they framed me before they stepped out the car, before they decided to stop all the way at the end of the block, I was being profiled, and for the language of this video, I was being framed, right? First impressions. Melanated man wearing a sweater with particular patterns. We got one. He's doing something. So I was framed. However, that frame that they gave me doesn't negate my essence. It doesn't negate the access that I have to my essence. It doesn't negate the duty that I have to myself to honor and respect my essence. I have a great essence. I don't shave that away to be like other people. And that worked out for me in this particular instance. Because although I can play and wear different hats, I can do hood fly. I can do hood fly if I really wanted to. That doesn't mean that I'm a hood guy. Just because I can get hood fly doesn't mean I'm a hood guy. Just because I can get hood fly, that doesn't mean that I can't embody the essence of your sergeant. It doesn't mean that I can't embody the essence of your employer. It doesn't mean I can't put my foot on your neck. Tell you when you're operating outside of your jurisdiction. Demand apologies for your incompetence. Make you go home and think about your life. None of those things are outside the realm of my capabilities. That story is actually done. That's it. That's the story. I seen them see me from way down the block. I knew they was fiending. They thought that they had a different kind of guy, and they got to meet me, and I got to meet them as well. And it was a educational experience. Outside of that last story, and further driving home the importance of holding your frame, honoring yourself amongst pressure, honoring your essence amongst pressure, staying true to your feelings and acting in accordance with it, despite genuinely feeling, whether you feel genuinely pressured or not, there's still a duty to hold frame, to navigate yourself to your breath, to bring yourself back home, and to act from the center, as opposed to respond from the center as opposed to react based on external pressure. Very important thing. I'm going to wrap this video up by telling you that even though I held this frame, even though that I essentially carried my friends by all account because they didn't know what to do, they were ready to yield. Even though I held my essence, I carried my frame, even though this was one instance among many where I demonstrated the capacity to be an amazing pilot and to shift and to make profound judgments in multiple instances over time. That does not prevent a person from devaluing who you are. That doesn't stop a person from choosing external pressures over you. I was here defending people from external pressures over and over again, thinking that I was demonstrating the value of the individual and demonstrating that the pressures aren't necessarily as pressuring as the external would like some of us to believe. Even though I've done similar things with these friends over the course of years of my life, it doesn't stop them from reaching a point to where they feel inclined to oppose me because they're being pressured by external forces. And when that realization came to me, I realized we were not in alignment. I realized that I was choosing real right, or at the very least, aligning myself with the ability to choose real right in the face of external pressures. And my friends were aligning with the spirit of the sloth. They were aligning with the spirit of the sellout. If you trade freedom for security, you deserve neither. And I'm going to bring this to a close. This has been the Crusade, the Reframe. There has been many crusades to frame us in ways that make it difficult for us to show up as our authentic selves because of external pressures. However, we have a duty to combat these crusades, to brave the storm, to go against the grain. Because going against the grain is the only thing that will provide a future for our children in which they will experience a combination of having less of those pressures and also having the fortitude to progress in the face of those pressures. So it's not enough to depend on hopeful wishing that these pressures will disappear. Conflict is part of the dynamic. These pressures will appear. People will intentionally create pressures that will afford them an environment to rape and pillage that will conflict with the way you show up in the world. It is your duty and your duty to the children that you love, if you love them, if you care about real right, if you care about your future self, if you if you think about reincarnation, maybe you will reincarnate, maybe you won't. But if you're coming back here and you're not considering doing real right, I think you're doing yourself a great disservice in the future lifetime and the future lifetime of souls that you will be bringing into the world. Please take something away from what I said. Please deviate from logical thinking and fortify yourself. Gain the ability to go against the grain. Check in with yourself. Value the practice of responding from the center as opposed to reacting to external pressures. That will put you closer to the position of a true sovereign individual in essence than anything else that I have currently presented to you. And without getting closer to sovereign essence and acting from the center with sovereign essence, we will be contributing to a world where systems of rape and pillage will evolve quickly, rapidly, explosively, without any resistance. And that is not sensible. It is not just. Bye, guys. Love you. See ya. Hope you have a good day. Okay, take care now. Mwah.